Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Top 10 video. Today we'll be going over the top 10 items for patch 11.17. The item meta has been rather stable for the mid-set with only a few balance changes. We also already took a look at the top Radiant items in a previous patch, so this is a great time to see which regular items are doing well in the meta. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Starting off our top 10, we have Deathblade coming in at number 10. With the introduction of Radiant items, it has become standard to slam a lot of early items since most of the components you get each game will appear before Wolves. This means a lot of the item meta revolves around items that you can make early that scale well into the late game. Deathblade is one of those items that is universally usable by any AD champion since it's relevant all game. The main issue with slamming an early Deathblade is that it does lock you into playing some type of AD comp, or at least a secondary carry that is AD. Because of that, it's not always the best idea to make it early. Delaying making Deathblade means a higher chance of finding a Radiant version on 3.6, which is just strictly better than the regular version. Of course, you're not always going to take the Radiant version every game, but if you have any inclination to play an AD at any point in the game, there's a strong chance that you will. What all this means is that Deathblade can be a fantastic AD item, but is less likely to be made early, at least compared to other items, which are more flexible. While it does add a lot of AD, the fact that it only is an increase in attack damage limits its flexibility compared to a lot of other early game items. Let's continue on to the next item coming in at number 9, Shojin. If we were still in 11.16, Shojin would certainly be higher on the list. That is because AP compositions were a lot more common. But now with the nerfs to Vel'Koz and Heimerdinger and buffs to a bunch of AD champions, we're seeing a meta shift back towards AD boards. What that means is players are less likely to make a Shojin when they have the components for it because they don't want to be locked into playing an AP comp. That said, Abomination is still doing well enough, which is the easiest path to playing an AP carry that uses Shojin. The top 3 and most common are Zyra, Vel'Koz, and Heimerdinger. Teemo can also use Shojin, but Teemo is always on the fringe of the meta due to costing health. Since it's not uncommon to see a late game Heimerdinger or mid game Vel'Koz, Shojin still provides a lot of value. In fact, it's a necessity for those champions as both of them had their max mana increased in 11.17. Outside of AP carries, the use of Shojin is relatively limited. Occasionally Syndra will be given one, or even Viego, but not many other champions want to use the item. The limited use is why Shojin is only number 9 on the list. Moving on, we have Redemption coming in at number 8. Ever since they added AoE damage reduction to Redemption, it has been one of the better defensive items. Depending on the meta, it's almost a necessary item to have to prevent getting wrecked by champions like Vel'Koz or Heimerdinger. In the current meta, with those two champions being slightly less common, it's not as necessary of an item. That said, healing is still beneficial, and reducing damage taken from AoE is still a worthwhile boon. The healing can be limited due to the range restriction of Redemption, but it's still effective enough, particularly on frontliners. Even more so for Abomination board, since you can double up on Redemption by giving it to an Abomination champion. The healing will extend the life of your frontline, especially when paired with Revenant units. It's also useful on backline carries, but less so for healing and more so for the AoE damage reduction. Overall, Redemption isn't the type of item that players make early on, but is worth making later on in the game when you have the components for it. The type of item you make when you have nothing else to use an extra belt and tier for. Despite the lack of priority, it's still plenty useful. Next up, we have Archangel Staff as the number 7 item. Much like Shojin, Archangel Staff has fallen down in priority due to the nerfs received to Heimerdinger and Vel'Koz. If we were still in 11.16, it would be likely in the top 5 simply because of how effective it is on those two champions, specifically Heimerdinger. Even with the nerf to those champions, it's still a must-have item on them if possible. In fact, it's technically even better on them since it increases AP based on percent of the user's max mana, and both of those champions had their mana increased. What makes this item so good for high mana pool champions is it provides scaling. If the unit gets 2 or 3 casts off in the fight, the scaling from Archangels is almost guaranteed to win the fight. But it does require multiple casts, so it's important to run some type of mana generator with it, such as Invoker or Shojin. All in all, Archangel Staff is still a key item in the meta since Vel'Koz, Heimerdinger, and even Teemo are still playable, just don't expect to see a lot of priority given to it until later on in the game. Coming in at number 6, we have Bramble Vest. Bramble Vest flies under the radar a lot because it's not the flashiest of items. The benefit it brings can be difficult to see value from until later on in the game, even though it's effective all game. Part of that is due to the thorn effect of Bramble Vest being a bit underwhelming. Sure, it's dealing damage, but the amount of damage it does is rather lackluster beyond the early rounds of Stage 2. Where Bramble Vest shines, and may often be overlooked, is that it negates bonus critical strike damage. Whether that's AP or AD, though in the current meta it matters much more for AD champions. It's the bane of any AD champion that relies on critical strikes, like Assassins, or even champions like Aphelios that are often given Infinity Edge. Due to that, Bramble Vest is all around one of the better mid to late game defensive items to keep your frontliners alive for a lot longer. Champions like Reller Volibear, which you want alive for as long as possible. The main downside is that only one champion is likely to have a Bramble Vest per game, so not all of your board will be protected from critical strikes. And Last Whisper does exist, so even if it's negating bonus damage, it's not preventing the armor reduction being applied from the critical hits. Still, Bramble is an underrated item that provides a lot of value, especially in a meta that favors AD comps. Moving along, we have Bloodthirster coming in at number 5. Bloodthirster is honestly the Cinderella story of Set 5. Sure, it's been useful in previous sets and metas, but in Set 5, this item has gone way up in value. A lot of that has to do with the change that gives a shield when low on health, but still, the usage of Bloodthirster in Set 5 feels much higher than ever before. And that really hasn't changed in 11-17, as Bloodthirster is still a sought-after AD utility item for, well, basically any AD champion. There's plenty of early game item holders that use it effectively, like Callista, Riven, or several different skirmishers, and several late game AD carries. Those being Aphelios, Jax, Draven, Akshan, and even Lucian. The number of champions that can use Bloodthirster makes it one of the most common items in the meta, and overall worth making even as early as Stage 2. Let's move on to the next item that comes in at number 4, Warmogs. Warmogs is the first item in the top 10 that is playable in every single game, regardless of what composition you play, whether that's during the early, mid, or late game. There have been other items that have been used often, like Bramble Vest or Redemption, but Warmogs is an item that you actively try to make during the early game. The reason is simple. It provides a ton of health. That's it. Of course, there's a bit more to that because the reason bonus health is so impactful has a lot to do with the design of Set 5 champions and traits. Dawnbringer, for example, provides more healing based on the champion's maxed health, so increasing that makes the heal more effective. Deathbringer Shield, based on max health, same as skirmishers. Brawlers, they already have a lot of health, but having even more makes them even harder to kill. Even specific champions gain bonuses for having higher health. The best, of course, is Nunu, who does true damage if his health is higher than the enemy unit. On top of all that, the fact that it's providing 1,000 extra health in total is like adding another champion to your board, which is quite helpful in the early game. Warmogs may not be all that interesting of an item, but it's certainly one of the best flex items in Set 5. Up next, we have Sunfire Cape coming in at number 3. While Warmogs is a highly defensive item, Sunfire is both defensive and offensive. It provides useful stats like health and armor, but the important part of Sunfire Cape is that it burns nearby enemy champions, dealing a percent of their max health as true damage over time. And even more importantly, applying a healing reduction. Healing reduction is hugely impactful in the current meta, and really for all of Set 5 so far. There's so many champions with either built-in healing or synergies with healing effects. And then there's commonly used items like Bloodthirster and Hand of Justice. Not having a way to reduce that healing is a surefire way to lose rounds at any stage of the game. Sunfire Cape is the quick and easy answer to all of that healing, making it one of the most slammed items in the meta. Coming in at number 2, we have Last Whisper. We've already mentioned the bane of some AD champions earlier with Bramble Vest, since it negates bonus damage from critical strikes. Last Whisper is the counter to that, not so much for the damage, but to apply the armor reduction. And that's very important in the meta because Ironclad exists as well as other armor-heavy frontliners. Without Last Whisper, an AD carry may end up taking the entire round of combat to kill the other player's frontline. The time to kill without Last Whisper is just too high, making Last Whisper a necessity when running any AD carry. Akshan does help when there's no Last Whisper, but if you want guaranteed armor reduction for your main carry, you'll need Last Whisper. It's not even up for debate. If you're playing an AD composition, build Last Whisper. And finally, onto our number 1 item for 11-17, Hand of Justice. Hand of Justice is by far the most flexible item in the meta ever since they reworked it to provide a baseline increase in AD, AP, and healing. Just a universal catch-all item that fits onto any carry champion, whether that's AP or AD. Yes, there are items that are better for specific champions, and Bloodthirster may provide more defensive utility, but none of those items provide as much flexibility as Hand of Justice. Fact is, you can make a Hajj early on in the game and it won't dictate what you play later on. This leaves you open to flex towards any board instead of pigeonholing yourself into either AD or AP. No other item really comes close to that flexibility, which is why Hand of Justice is our #1 item. And that's it for our top 10 items for patch 11.17. But before we go, we do have 2 honorable mentions to talk about. Those 2 honorable mentions are Banshee's Claw and Shroud of Stillness. We want to preface this by saying that these 2 items are amazing. They provide a ton of utility and are always worth considering as items to make in the mid to late game. But they are also inferior to their Radiant versions. For most items, this isn't an issue, but for these 2 items, the difference is staggering. Both Radiant Banshees and Shroud are so good that when either of them are pickable on 3/6, there's barely any other items worth considering. That's how good the Radiant versions are, meaning they are quite common to see and end up overshadowing the regular versions. As we said though, both Banshees and Shroud are fantastic items, but we do recommend their Radiant versions instead. Alright, that's all we have for you for today, folks. Overall, the item meta is in a stable spot with multiple items viable, whether that's defensive, offensive, or utility. Midset so far has been the best item balance we've ever seen in TFT, both with regular items and the Radiant mechanic. Let us know in the comment section below what items you're having the most success with. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.